We have been talking about measures of accountability and how you can open communication on how things can improve. I do believe that 360 evaluations are invaluable for giving feedback to supervisors and managers, but I want to offer a warning. I was working with a federal agency and I happened to see their 360 evaluation, and I'll be honest with you, it was the best summary of what characterizes an effective leader. It was awesome. I just sat there going, oh, whoever created this thing really knew what they were doing. And so I mentioned to a member of that organization what I just said, that it was an excellent summary and it was probably the best 360 I'd ever seen. And I noticed the person wasn't smiling or anything. And he said this, he said, everybody hates that form. I go, what? I said, why would they hate it? He said, because we filled it out when they created it, but the administration of this organization did nothing about responding to what people shared. Think about that. They said, tell us how your supervisor or manager is doing. And people filled out the form and were honest. And when it came to the worst manager and people shared specifically what was being done incorrectly and everything, nothing was done in response to this. And they found out that what management was doing was the only person who got to see it was the person being evaluated. And they had the choice, which they did, to ignore what people said. So they got this feedback and there was no follow up on it. So basically they asked people to share what was going good and what was going bad, and when people shared what was going bad, nothing was done about it. And I want you to think about this. Don't ever ask for people's opinions and feedback if you're not going to do something about what they say. I think actually, and I saw this in my interaction with this person with this federal agency, you're worse off than before if you ask them and then ignore what they're saying. You basically slap people in the face when you ask for their input and you go, but I'm not going to do that. So I said, well, I asked the guy, so what do people do in the form? He said, literally, when they're asked to fill out the form, they just either leave it blank or do a line through each category and turn it in. And I want to ask you to consider this too, just as a little side issue. Do you understand the liability issue that you're creating there? So that if you're asking people to evaluate supervisors and managers and everybody agrees that Tom is an idiot and doesn't do his job, what's going to happen when Tom screws up and there's a civil suit by an employee or someone in the public, and they have documented that they were told this is a problem, but they didn't deal with it? It's that whole not dealing with problems and management's aversion to dealing with an issue or a problem employee or problem manager. I remember I was in an organization one time where they said, what should we change about the way we do things? 70% of the people in the organization responded that a particular thing they were doing was they didn't like it. And the response of the manager who was over that particular thing said, I'm not changing that. And then he said, well, I don't believe in surveys anyway. I remember how people were impacted by that. They said, what are they saying? That they don't care what we think. They ask us and then they don't care. So the point is, don't ask if you're not going to follow through. I've done about 12 climate surveys, management studies. And one of the things that I want to ask you to consider is you don't need to do those. And because if you remember, the three questions I ask on those is, what's the best part of working here, the worst part of working here, And if a genie gave you three wishes on how to change this, well, how about if everybody says that Lieutenant Wilson is a problem, but yet nothing is done to Lieutenant Wilson? Again, it's frustrating to people. But I want to tell you of a case where I saw when the information was taken seriously and followed through, it had a huge impact on the organization. I was doing a climate survey, again, management study. And you remember the third question is, what are three wishes? If a genie gave you three wishes, what would it be for? Well, as I was interviewing people, there was this deputy chief that was always being brought up. He was a pain in the butt. He was rude to people. He clearly loved himself too much. And I was walking down the hallway one day, and the police chief came up to me and said, "How's the survey going?" I said, "It's okay." He said, "What are they saying is a problem?" And I looked at him and I said, "Deputy Chief so and so or Assistant Chief so and so, I don't remember the rank." And you could see the look of dread on his face. And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I've not met anybody in the interview process that thinks he's doing a good job." And he just got promoted, right? And he said, "Yeah, he used to be a captain and I promoted him to Assistant Chief." And I could see the hesitancy on his face and fear. He said, "Well, I wonder what I should do." I said, "They told you what the problem is, and now it's up to you to follow through on it." And I was out of the country for a couple of weeks. And when I came back, I saw a manager with that agency, and he said, "Did you hear what happened?" I said, "Well, I've been out of the country." He said, "The assistant chief was demoted back to captain." And I went, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah. I mean, everybody was shocked. We've never seen that before." But I want to give you a postscript that I think is very powerful. So I was still having to do interviews. And when I went back into the agency to do some more interviews, guess who I see walking down the hallway towards me? It is the former assistant chief who is now the captain. And I'm going, "Oh my goodness." And so he comes up to me and he said, "Jack," he said, "I guess you heard I got demoted." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I understand it was what people told you in the survey." And I said, "That's correct." He said, "That was probably one of the worst days of my career, to be demoted from assistant chief to captain." And I said, "I understand that." But listen to what he said. "But it was also the best day." And I was shocked at that. I said, "Why was it the best day?" He said, "You know, I love to being a captain in specialized units. That's where most of my experience was. I was used to having a small group of specialized special ops people and tactical people, and I loved working in that environment." And he said, "When I got promoted, I was over hundreds of people who I did not know, most of them. I'm not wasn't sure how to handle that the people I was responsible for were spread all over the county." And he said, and I was very frustrated. And obviously, I showed that by the way I talked to people. And what they said was obviously correct. And he said, "I want you to know something." He said, "I needed to be demoted. And now that I'm back as a captain in special ops and stuff," he said, "I'm as happy as I can be because I really kind of wanted to be promoted, but I didn't understand it was going to be promoted into something that I really wasn't equipped for." So he said, "I'm kind of mad at you, but I'm also thankful that the chief listened to what people said." Think of that. That basically, by listening to the feedback of the people who know the people who are either very good or, in this case, not being effective, you help the organization, but you also help the person that was being ineffective. Being truthful, telling people the right thing, and it it benefits everyone. And yet most people are silent and don't deal with issues, and it discourages people. So ask for input, but make sure you follow through on it, because everybody will benefit from it if you keep that communication flow coming, and then you respond to what the men and women throughout the organization see what's going on, and problems are addressed. Thanks for joining us on the They to We Leadership podcast. If today's episode helped you think differently about management, take a moment to reflect and then apply it, because real leadership isn't what you say, it's what you do next. And the real enemy is our pride and blindness on how we are really doing. Only with the help of others can we truly make an impact on those around us.